Hi guys, today we will do something a little bit different. Today we have one of our very good friends here in Portugal, John, joining us because we want him to share his experience after he moved to Portugal from the US. So, hi John, how are you?
Hi Mia, thank you very much for having me.
So can you share a little bit about who you are, how long have you been here to our viewers, please?
Sure, will do. So my name is John and I grew up in Texas and then for 22 years lived in San Francisco, California, where I worked for a major investment firm researching stocks. And about, I guess it was almost 4 years ago, my wife and I moved from San Francisco to Lisbon, Portugal, and we really think it was one of the best decisions we've ever made. So, really love it.
Well, from San Francisco to Lisbon, it must be quite a difference. Did you guys feel like you have to adapt quite a lot? Was it difficult at the beginning? Because neither of you spoke Portuguese, right?
That is true. That is true. About a year before we moved here, we started studying Portuguese using audio courses and that kind of thing. So we knew a lot of the basics, and we sort of understood the pronunciation, which is one of the trickier parts of the language. But by the time we got here, we were pretty good at restaurants and bars, which is where we spend most of our time when we're not at home. So.
It's very, very normal. Yeah. And you guys are based in Lisbon, right?
Yes.
You have a home here.
Yes.
Have you traveled a lot in Portugal since you're here?
Yes, we have. But we moved here about 9 months before COVID started. So that threw off some of our travel plans, particularly outside of Portugal. But it did encourage us to travel more within Portugal. So we've been to, I think, the major parts of the country, the Algarve a few times, to the interior part of Alentejo, like Évora, where there's some great wineries. And we've been up to Serra da Estrela a couple of times, up in the mountains. We've been to Porto a couple of times, been to the Douro Valley, which is gorgeous, a couple of times, then up along the coast a bit. I went to Nazaré to watch some surfing.
Oh, you guys been everywhere.
Yeah, and then a lot around Lisbon, the whole Lisbon area, Sintra and Cascais, and down to Costa de Caparica and Azeitão and Sesimbra and Setúbal, and there's so much to see here. It's really beautiful. The amazing thing is, having lived in California, it's incredibly similar to California. The weather is very similar. The geography, the coast looks very similar. The beaches, the wineries, it's very much like California. But the advantage is it's much cheaper, it's much safer. People are much more civilized and normal and nice.
People are very friendly.
Yeah, very friendly. It's much calmer. I think in the U.S. now, especially in the last couple of years, it's become more, people are more, there's more conflict, I think, among people. And here, there's a lot of harmony among people, so it's very nice.
And also, I found from my own experience, people from Portugal, they're very willing to help people like us who moved here, who don't really speak the language at the beginning. Everyone is really, really eager to help you almost.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Yes, we originally were looking at moving to Spain because we know some Espanol, and but we didn't end up moving there largely because they have some really bad tax laws. They have an inheritance tax and a wealth tax that Portugal doesn't have. And then we came here and we found exactly that, the people to be much more welcoming of foreigners, I think, than people in Spain, and they speak much better English here. I think Portugal is, top 10 countries for English speaking outside of the normal US and the UK and that kind of thing. So the English is really helpful, and they're just very friendly, open people. So it's really nice. The downside is, particularly in Lisbon or I think Algarve or some places, it's hard to learn Portuguese because I walk into a store, I say bon dia, and they say English. I say yes, English. So it's hard to learn.
I share the same experience. I think it's especially me or you, we are visible, almost visible like tourists. So people always say, how can I help you? Exactly. Then you sort of just let them help you in English.
It's easier for everybody. Exactly.
Yes. Spain and Portugal, a lot of people compare these two countries before they make a decision on relocating to either of the country. I think from a lot of people who haven't been to both for a longer period of time, it looks very similar, right? It's close by. And but once you are here in Portugal, I was really amazed how the culture is very, very different. I mean, when you go to a Portuguese restaurant here, and usually it's very quiet. It's and people also, they are very, as you said, very well educated, and they speak amazing English.
Yes, and yeah, I think beyond that, yeah, I think people here are generally friendlier. They speak better English. I think the Spanish, from what I love Spain and I love the Spanish people, but they seem, Portugal's a smaller country, so I think they have to be in a way more open to other cultures and that kind of thing. And Spanish is in some ways a more broadly spoken language. More countries I think speak Spanish. So I think the Spanish feel that they don't really need to learn a new language, and they have enough within their big country to not really be as concerned about welcoming others. But the other issue is in Spain, the lifestyle is more different, I would say, from the US than Portugal. Is like the hours, in Spain, we've had dinner usually not before 10 p.m., often 1 a.m. So, and they do more siesta in the afternoon, whereas Portugal, the hours are more similar, I think, to the US. And, we usually have dinner here around 8 or so, and instead of 10 or later. And yeah, the people are quieter here. They're, I think, a little more calm. That in some ways, the Spanish are more like Americans, are a little bit louder and a little bit more aggressive. Yes, but wonderful people.
Yes, I was actually shocked when I first started living in Portugal. I was shocked that they didn't have siesta here, because I lived in Spain. That killed me. It's around the time I'm like,
when you're finally getting going.
Yes, when I want to be very productive, and everything was closed. But I was really shocked that Portuguese, they work really hard, actually.
Absolutely.
And sometimes long hours, they don't close.
Yes.
You guys both had very good corporate jobs, right? When you guys were in San Francisco. What made you to decide to leave all that and move to another country?
Well, I'd always wanted to live in another country outside the US, and every time I've been to Europe, I've really enjoyed it. And so we really wanted to live in Europe at some point. It's been a long-term goal of ours. And I was able to come up with an idea for an online business that I've really been wanting to do. Yeah. So something that I could live anywhere and work on this business. And so we thought, now the time is right to launch this business, and we can do it from anywhere. Let's do it from Europe, which we really enjoy, and it is much lower cost of living here. And also, just after almost 50 years living in the United States, it's a wonderful country, obviously, and we have obviously friends and family there, and it's great. But we're just ready for something new. I'd kind of seen most of the U.S. and just the variety of Europe, all these different countries and different languages and different cultures in such a small place. It makes it really fun to travel around and live a different life. So
it wasn't a difficult decision. It was very natural for you.
No, yeah, it's something we were looking forward to and very excited about. And we moved here. Our biggest concern was making friends, the language, etc. And we've made so many friends here. It's so easy to meet people here from around the world, especially Lisbon. We wanted to live in, we lived in San Francisco, so the bridge is the same here, actually. And we wanted to live in, a bigger city where there's a lot of cultural events going on and that kind of thing, and a lot of restaurants and all of that. So that's really kind of why we chose Lisbon. And we didn't realize what a mecca it is, I guess, for international expats. So we've met people from all over the world, and we have like good friends from all these places that I didn't even know people lived in. So, but it's been great. We made lots of friends. We had a anniversary party recently, my wife and I, and we invited over 100 people, 100 friends we knew. And there's every day there's tons of events to do, social events with meetup groups or internations as an expat group. But that's been the biggest positive surprise, is just how many friends we've made, both local and expat friends.
I actually met you guys from a networking party as well a couple of years ago.
Yes.
And I totally agree with John. It's actually very easy to make friends. And people are very open-minded, no matter it's local or foreigners who just move here. And also, I think Lisbon gives this energy, right? It's very, very open and really encourage people to get to know each other, also get to know the culture. And I mean, especially for Portuguese people, if you ask them or if you show your interest with some cultural things or some place that you've seen, you pass by, they are so interested in explaining everything and language, the words and this and that. They're very proud of their culture, which I think this is so so awesome, especially for outsider. You come to a place like this and they're like, oh, wow, you like our culture, you're interested. Oh, we'll be more than happy to explain to you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Knowing what you know, would you have done anything different?
Anything different? You can never learn enough Portuguese. So we studied, I think, reasonably hard the year before we came, but in retrospect, we probably should have taken a course, maybe an intensive course early on, our first 6 to 12 months. We didn't do that. We were having too much fun, and then COVID came along and all of that. But I think the language really is the main hard part. And again, it's not that hard in Lisbon, but if you can learn the language, it would be great. And so we haven't really taken intense classes. We're thinking of doing that maybe next year in order to qualify for the passport, which we'd like to get here. But I think the language is the main thing. Another difficult thing here, which you all are experts in, is real estate. Whether you rent or buy, and the location. And real estate in Portugal is much more difficult than in the U.S. In the U.S., most things are new and they have standard amenities and that kind of thing. And in Portugal, every property is unique, and it's very complicated. So that's where, having experts like you all is incredibly helpful, because it's not as easy as the U.S., that's for sure. So I think those are the two main things that one should focus on.
The market is very different here, that's for sure. And do you want to share a little bit about your likes and dislikes?
About Portugal?
Yes.
Let's see, everyone complains about the bureaucracy here. It's not great, but it's not great in most countries. I think we got pretty lucky. We moved here in summer of 2019, and within 4 or 5 months, everything was taken care of as far as our new driver's license and our healthcare and our visas and everything. We hired somebody to help us through the process, which I think is an excellent idea. A lot of people do it themselves, but I thought it was really helpful to hire somebody who knows the language and knows how everything. So once you get through that, then we really don't have much interaction at all with the typical bureaucracy here. But initially that can be a bit daunting. And then I have to say, I think a lot of countries outside the US, the customer service isn't always as good as it is, or as attentive it is in the US. A lot of times we'll go to a restaurant, we'll order several items and they'll forget 1 or 2 of them and things like that. But let's see, service and bureaucracy, I think those are the main things.
Dislikes.
Yeah, it's the main dislikes. And then the likes, again, the number one, it does sound corny, but the people, again, we weren't really banking, good or bad on people, but the people have turned out to be wonderful, Portuguese as well as expats. People are great. The social life is great. Lots of concerts, music concerts, great restaurants, great food, great wineries, beautiful beaches. It's easy to travel around Europe. We've been to the UK and Greece and Spain. I think that's all we've been to so far, but I'm hoping we went to Belgium and Amsterdam as well. So anyway, we're trying to get out a bit more, but the weather's great. It's very similar to California. In the winter, at least in Lisbon, it's similar to Northern California. It's a little bit chilly and rainy, but it's really December through February, it seems like, where it's kind of the worst of it. And then the summer is wonderful. It's more like Southern California in the summer, like LA or San Diego. It's really beautiful, and you can go to the beach in 15 minutes, and so that's great. And let's see, I don't know, it's just very easy to live here. It's very safe. You can walk around any time of the day or night, and it's very safe. And people actually are really good at, which is very opposite of the US, they're very good at avoiding conflict here. If there's a problem, you quickly learn to do it in a nice way and not fight over things like you would often in the US. So it's a very pleasant, harmonious kind of experience here, which is very nice.
What about, I don't know if you have had experience with hospitals. Do you have a conclusion? Because that's like one of the major concerns when people want to move to a certain country.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of our biggest concerns. We had always, growing up in the US, you're told we have the best healthcare system in the world, and et cetera, et cetera. And, it's expensive, but it's worth it, all that kind of thing. And since we've been here, we found the healthcare to be better than we had in the US. We haven't used the public hospital services yet. We have private health insurance, which we're paying less than we were paying month per month. We're paying less for a year than we were paying for a month in the United States.
It's a big difference.
Big difference. So we go to a private hospital, and they're brand new, state of the art, beautiful hospitals. Pretty much everyone speaks English. You know, it's really cheap. To get my driver's license, I had to get a EKG exam, and I went to pay for it, and they said it's $120. Sorry, they said it.
I had the same
Sorry.
experience.
They said it was 120. They said it was 125, and I said 125. That seems like a lot. And they said no, it's 1.25 euros. Sorry, I thought it was so funny. Let's see. Yeah, so it's great. It's been wonderful.
You know, the whole world, we're experiencing inflation, and especially Lisbon has become such a popular destination in the past couple of years, right? And we see it in real estate. The price is just, you guys also know, for renting and also for buying, the market has grown a lot. So as for cost of living, do you notice a big difference compared to when you just arrived here and now?
Yes, I think the real estate has gotten more expensive, definitely. That's really the main problem as far as cost of living. Lisbon is not particularly cheap, as I would say, for real estate. But everything else, you know, there's been some inflation in the past couple of years around the world, and there has been some here. But generally, your day-to-day food items or a glass of wine, etc., it seems like it's not really that much higher than when we first came here. I haven't seen the numbers, but our day-to-day cost of living hasn't changed that much. It doesn't seem like. And there are more, I think, as more expats move here, there are kind of fancier new restaurants and that kind of thing. So there are, you know, some more expensive restaurants, but the traditional Portuguese restaurants, which we love, the prices are still very attractive, and they really haven't changed all that much from what I've seen. So we're still very happy with the cost of living, but the real estate is tricky. You know, I think, you know, to me, Portugal seems like California, 50 years ago. And if you bought real estate in California 50 years ago, you'd be very happy. And I think that's the way Portugal is shaping up as well. So anyway, yeah, real estate's the tricky part here. Otherwise, it's healthcare costs dramatically lower, food costs much lower. Generally, I think our costs are less than half of what they were in San Francisco for almost everything, including real estate, because real estate's very high in San Francisco. But cost of living here is still generally much less than almost anywhere in the U.S., except for real estate. And then real estate, as you know, can be cheaper if you're just outside of Lisbon and that kind of thing. But if you want to be in the center of Lisbon, you have to pay for it. So.
Yeah, and also I would say, you guys also moving from a big city, I would also say a life in Lisbon, the lifestyle is very different. We can go to the beach very quickly, it's free. We can go to the park to do a picnic, it's free. We can use a lot of facilities, and the public transportation is also very, very reasonable, and we walk a lot here.
Absolutely.
I think versus to the big city sort of lifestyle, when we go out, we both like Portuguese restaurants. It's not only going for the ambience or for the view and this and that. It's more down to earth. So I think that helps to get a control or your cost of living as well.
Absolutely, yes. In the U.S., I think a lot of it is geography in a way. Like European cities were built before automobiles, so they tend to be smaller, which has its pros and cons. But one positive is it's easy to meet up with people. There's tons of cultural events, museums or classical music concerts or what have you. I remember you can look at virtually any day of the week, like on Facebook events and in Lisbon, and you'll just scroll one event after another, and most of them are free. And people, it's a way to socialize much more. I think it's much more social here. In the U.S., people work hard, they go to work, they come home, they watch Netflix or something on TV, and then they go do it again the next day. And here, people work hard, but there's so many cheap or free events to meet up socially, and it's so easy to meet up because things are more compact. And it's just culturally, it's much more social life in Europe in general, I think, and certainly in Portugal and Lisbon in particular, than it is in the U.S. And again, a lot of that is because there are so many events that are cheap or free to do.
Yeah. And for example, we can just say we meet by the Tejo River in front of some museum, and we can just go for a walk, right? We don't have to go to some bar or club or restaurant,
Exactly.
yeah, to spend 1 or 2 hours together when you meet with friends. So you were in your previous career, which is investment management, right?
Yes.
For 22 years.
Yes.
And you quit your job, you moved to Lisbon.
Yes.
And then you started your own business, right?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it, and how did you come to this idea?
Thank you. So I worked for 22 years for a major investment firm researching stocks, managing portfolios. And I worked during the early 2000s tech bust and bear market, as well as the Great Recession, tech bust and bear market, as well as the huge bull markets around those. So I experienced the bull and the bear markets, and I realized that there's very little anyone helping people make money in both bull markets and bear markets. Most people are told to just hold on during a bear market, and you can lose 50% or more of your money, and it can take 10 years or more to get back to break even. And so I saw an opportunity there to help people, again, make up a lot of money in bull markets, which I know how to do from researching stocks and funds, etc. But then in bear markets, there are funds that actually go up when stocks go down or other things go down. So that's the idea of it. So I started a business about 2 years ago called Bull and Bear Profits, bullandbearprofits.com.
I'll link the website in the description below.
Thank you very much. And so the idea is, again, make profits in bull markets and bear markets. So I look at lots of fundamental indicators, economic indicators to determine if we're heading into a recession or a recovery, and then lots of technical indicators to figure out what are the most promising investments, either individual stocks or ETFs, usually and across all asset classes, stocks, bonds, commodities, cryptocurrencies, etc. So anyway, it's I think a unique service, and I think one that people who've discovered it have given me a lot of positive feedback, saying they really can't find this anywhere else, and our analysis is very unique and helpful. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Was it part of your plan when you moved here to start something by yourself?
Yes, that was a big motivation. I wanted to kind of be my own boss, be an entrepreneur instead of working for a large company for the first time, and to enable my wife and I to travel. I can work anywhere, and also again, particularly to live in Europe. And part of the idea was I don't know how quickly this will take off, this business, so we wanted to have a lower cost structure. And so again, Portugal is much lower cost than California. So it's been great. It's worked out just as we hoped it would.
How many times did you guys come to Portugal before you decide to make the move?
My wife and I came one time about a year before we moved in 2018 for 2 weeks in March of 2018, and it rained every single day.
Sorry.
And I thought this was supposed to be a sunny, beautiful thing, but it rained every day, and everybody told us it was very unusual. It hadn't rained for 2 months, and which I think turned out to be true. Anyway, and then I think once we left, it was sunny, and so we got very unlucky with the weather. But my wife and I figured if we liked it, then we would love it when it's sunny, and it usually is sunny, which is very nice, particularly in the half of the year in the summer. And when we came here, we spent 2 weeks, and we arranged every lunch and dinner with an American expat who had moved here to get their American experience, kind of like I'm trying to do now. And we basically asked everybody, we asked them lots of details about life here, and bottom line is we asked everybody, are you happy you moved here? Would you do it again? Everyone said, love it, it's great, do it, don't even worry about it. And anyway, so it was universal, and so that really helped convince us to come. And so that was that one time, and it was a lot of fun. I had been here about 25 years ago when I was backpacking around Europe, but I don't remember too much about it, except I do remember I'd been in Spain before, and then we came to Portugal, and I just remember thinking, and I still have this feeling when I come back from Spain to Portugal, just how much more relaxed things are, and the food is lighter. It's very heavy food. In Spain, it's very good food, but it can be very heavy, and the food is lighter, the people are lighter, the English is much easier. And I think the weather is generally better here. It can get really hot in most parts of Spain, and here, being right on the ocean, I think it moderates the climate in the winter and the summer. So everything is just kind of easier and nicer here. And so I remember that feeling when I was here just for a couple of days about 25 years ago, and then I had the exact same feeling when we came back, and every time.
Sometimes you feel like in Portugal as if time has stopped. We travel a lot because of our work. And in some villages, you still feel like, for me, it's like around 80s or 90s, when then in some areas of the world, people don't need to lock their doors. People are so trustful towards to others.
Absolutely.
So we talked about some pros and cons of living in Portugal. Who is Portugal not for?
I think probably the main, I guess, type of people it's not for is, well, first of all, if you want to make a lot of money, not having your own business that you could do anywhere in the world, you can make a lot more money. Salaries are much higher at Google in San Francisco than they are in most places here. So if you want to make a lot of money, if you're really starting your career as a young person, and you don't want to just be an entrepreneur or working online or what have you, you'll have more career opportunities generally in many other places like the US or the UK or Germany or what have you. So if you're kind of a young go-getter career-wise, it's not the best place unless you're starting your own online company perhaps. It's also, I think, for people, at least as an American, people who like things that are brand new and state-of-the-art.
Spacious.
Yeah, super clean. Yeah, big properties. If you have a huge house in the United States and you love it, you have a huge backyard, and if you love that, you can get that here, but you'll be outside the city and it's a different lifestyle. Yeah, that's I think the main thing. Things are old here. Generally, the streets are not always smoothly paved.
Very slippery as well.
Yeah. So yeah, but if you like old things, if you like that charm, which I do, then it's great. But if you like something brand new, big, tall glass skyscrapers, then this isn't the place for you.
I think basically also for people exactly who expect the same as in their home country,
Right.
probably will find a little bit more difficult.
Disappointed, yes.
Yes, to adapt.
Right.
For example, most of the buildings in Lisbon don't actually have elevator, or when they do, it's the elevator that seemingly not finished. It's missing a door or two because it's old.
Right.
Yes, but
A lot of people hurt themselves walking on the streets here, 'cause, so if you can't walk upstairs, then you don't have an elevator, it's an issue. So it's something to think about.
yeah, of course. So you're basically a digital nomad based in Lisbon.
Yes.
After 22 years of working for a firm, right?
Yes.
So how do you feel like, sitting in Lisbon, working with different time zones and watching and researching different markets?
Yes, it's interesting. So I focus mostly on the U.S. stock market, U.S. stocks and ETFs, which could be on any market in the world, but generally traded within the U.S. So I usually kind of keep U.S. market hours. And for me, I think it's great because the market opens at 9:30 in the morning in New York, and that's 2:30 in the afternoon here. So I can have lunch, I can go to the gym, and then do a lot of research before the market opens. So it's very, I think it's ideal really for me for the hours. I have sometimes interviews with various media outlets or what have you in the US, and sometimes I have to do those at midnight, that kind of thing. So sometimes the hours can be a bit challenging in that regard. So that's another thing to factor, your personal situation, what kind of hours you'd be working. And again, for me, I think most people that I know who work with kind of the US in some fashion or other prefer the hours here because it enables them to have, not have to get up so early and, to have a little bit of a life before they get started at work. But sometimes they may have to work later than they would have in the US. But, it's a personal decision. But I think it's great. I mean, the internet works great here, and all the news, the internet really makes this whole process so much easier. There's Amazon, there's Uber, all these Google Maps. If moving here before Google Maps, I think would have been challenging. to use a real map getting around Lisbon would have been a challenge. But now technology really has made this entire digital nomad lifestyle or expat lifestyle so much easier. And you have Zoom now to talk to your family and friends back home and that kind of thing. So it's technology really makes it easy. And
I think personal experience, just the only challenge probably is it can be distracting because the weather is always nice. You constantly wanted to step outside to take a walk or join the dinner on the terrace.
exactly.
So usually we would ask people in the part of the world, how do you balance? How do you not work too much? And here we will be asking the opposite of the question.
How do you get any work done?
How do you?
It's a challenge. It's
Exactly.
a challenge. Yeah. No, my wife and I, we really allocate the afternoon to working, pretty hard, getting the things we need to get done, doing our work. And then most nights we end up going out to dinner with friends or going to concert or, went to a football, soccer game last week and that kind of thing. I saw Ronaldo play, which is cool. So usually we're able to, go out and have fun but get a lot done in the afternoon. When you're working for yourself or you're working on your own, you can get a lot done in 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon. But if you're in an office, they kind of stretch out the time, and you really may only do 4 or 5 hours of work, but you're there for
You have a time
8 or
frame.
more hours. Yeah. So you can get a lot done in an afternoon if you focus on it. So.
Well, lately there has been a lot of Americans moving here, right? Or there's even more Americans thinking about moving here. What would you advise them? Now you've been here for 4 years, you did everything yourself. What do you think they should know?
Great. So I think, the main advice I would give anybody contemplating a move anywhere, even within the United States or wherever, is obviously thinking about what's really important to you and determining if that particular place you're considering really meets that criteria versus other criteria. So before we did this move, I did a lot of research on really countries throughout the world. I looked at the weather, throughout the year. There's some great websites, like for weather, there's one called weatherspark.com where you can compare cities on various weather metrics. There's a website called numbeo.com where you can compare different cities or countries on cost of living, quality of life, crime, etc. And so I did a lot of research on that, figuring out what's really important to me and my wife, and then, doing this research to narrow it down to particular places that we would consider. And then once you do that, let's say you've decided I want to move to Portugal or I want to move to Lisbon, then obviously, researching that, YouTube, et cetera, is very helpful. And then, of course, coming here, I think, is very helpful. So you can really see if, you can feel it, whether it's right for you or not. And then I really think it's helpful to hire somebody to deal with a lot of the bureaucracy, to deal with the real estate, et cetera. That seems where people have the most stress, is when they try to do all that on themselves, because it's not easy. So hiring people where you need help and learning the language before you come here, while you're here, it's a constant learning process, and just making the life you want to lead, making it your own, and then once you come here, finding your people, the people that you get along with. We've met a lot of people, some people we're not so compatible with, but other people we are very compatible with. So you find your new group of friends and that kind of thing. Just like if you were to move from New York to Los Angeles or what have you, it's the same idea. So it takes a lot of research, a lot of introspection and thought about what you really want. And then just once you figure it out, just go for it and try to make the happiest life you can. And I think living particular places, for me, I'm happier here than I would be, I think, in most places in the world. But everyone has to make that decision for themselves.
Even me and Raphael can constantly see how much you guys enjoy Portugal because you guys are out enjoying cultural events and things like that more than we do, much more. Like the football game, Raphael was dying to go to, but we couldn't. And then he was so jealous knowing you guys went. No, but I totally agree. I think moving to any other place or country, if you have this thought, it's actually not that big of deal. Just do your research and try to figure out whether you will like the place or not once you're there. And then, just go ahead, do it. And I also think we should hire the professionals to do the job.
Absolutely.
Recently, I went back to Spain to get a piece of paper when I was there. And then I contacted the lawyer I used back then for my residency card. And I hadn't seen her for 12 years. She still remembers me, and she helped me with the paperwork this time also. For me, I hired her back then. So then she became sort of my connection, right? So in the future, if I need something, she will be there for me. And it was so nice to see her. We hugged and da, da, da. And she asked me, where do I live now? I said, in Portugal. And then she said, oh, actually, my husband is Portuguese. So something I never knew before. It was very, very nice and surprising for me. But if I didn't hire her back then, now I wouldn't know where to start to get that piece of paper I needed. Yeah.
Yeah, finding the good contacts is really key. Exactly. And you know, that there are Facebook groups for expats, you know, where you can ask questions, you know, who's a good real estate person, who's a good lawyer, what have you, good accountant, that kind of thing, good doctor, good dentist. So yeah, learn from people who've already made the mistakes or found good, you know, word of mouth is very important when you go to a new country, and ask a lot of different opinions and make up your own mind. But yeah, you can't do it all yourself here. You come here, you know, you make a move to be happier, and you're not going to be happy if you're doing all this tough work on your own, and especially in a foreign language.
True. So let's talk more about cost of living. I really want to discuss a little bit more in detail because many people say nowadays, oh, Portugal is not cheap anymore. Lisbon is becoming very, very expensive. So what is your experience on this?
Yeah, again, first place I would look is numbeo.com, because you can do detailed comparisons of different cities on cost of living on all sorts of different items. And, you know, it's not perfect, but it's a good place to start. Anyway, so I would say, and I still think it's very cheap here. So like a typical lunch, for example, you can get at a local, you know, Portuguese Tasca, Portuguese restaurant, for 10 euros or so, usually with a coffee and maybe dessert or maybe a soup or something to start. So, you know, that's, I think, a pretty cheap lunch compared to what you'd have to pay in most places in the US. And that includes tax and usually tip, because you usually don't have to tip much. So,
and portion is big.
Yeah, and the portion is big. So, you know, in the US, you generally have to add 30% on top of whatever the price is on the menu. So here it's 10 euros, for example, that's 10 euros. And then dinner, like a fish entree or meat entree, would be 15 euros more or less. And then a beer, a glass of wine can be 3 euros or something like that.
That's on the expensive side.
Yeah. A bottle of wine is 10 to 15 euros. You can pay more, but you can get decent for that. You know, in San Francisco, my wife and I would go out to dinner. Didn't matter where we went. It was usually at least $200 for the two of us with a bottle of wine or something. And here it's more like 50, 60 or 70 or so. And that's getting a lot of food and all that kind of thing. So it's much cheaper to go out and have fun. Things like concert tickets are really cheap. We're going to a concert, and I think it's 80 euros for a ticket. And the same concert in the US that we have friends going to is $200. Oh, wow. So things are usually at least less than half the price. We went to this football game where Ronaldo played, Portugal national team, and the ticket was 7.5 euros. And I ordered 3 glasses of wine for me and a friend and my wife, and it was 3.6 euros for 3 glasses of wine. So it's incredibly cheap. If we had 3 glasses of wine and a football ticket in the US, it would be, you know, hundreds of dollars. Yeah, it's really cheap. I would say generally almost everything is less than half. Food, drinks, the grocery stores. You know, we can get a nice steak at the grocery store for 5 euros. That's pretty cheap. Food, yeah, basically everything. You know, healthcare, very cheap. Can be free if you go to the public healthcare. And Ubers, we take Ubers in a lot. We walk usually, but sometimes we take Ubers, and that's usually 5 euros to get across town. The metro is 150 or so, I think, to take a metro ride. Transportation's cheap. Things are pretty cheap. Real estate is a tricky part, and you can look online to see how much things cost and that kind of thing. But the day-to-day living is quite cheap. I think electricity is a little more than we were paying in the US. I think our electricity bill here is 150 euros or so a month, I think, which I think is more than we paid in San Francisco. But other than that, I would say less than half generally what we paid in California.
Because I think one of the reasons is while we are experiencing inflation here, the rest of the world also.
Absolutely.
So if you compare Portugal to Portugal 5 years ago, of course, it's way more expensive now. But then the rest of the world is also becoming more expensive. Money starts to worth a little bit less. The rest of the world also is experiencing inflation. Actually, I think in many countries like China, US, the inflation was much bigger before. People are used to it. Portugal, not. We're not used to it here. And the second reason is why it has become such a popular place from our line of work, the real estate. Why is it become much more expensive than before? Yes, it's a part of the reason is definitely many people move here from other parts of the world. But why? The reason is it's safe. Safety is priceless. You know, people are not asking much. People just want to live a life. And they just want to go somewhere. They work, they go home, they have a family. But unfortunately, in some parts of the world, this is not possible or not possible on a daily basis. That people need to worry about things. I think that's the reason that when they see Portugal is so safe, and so friendly to children, and people are so nice to each other, they're like, oh, wow, we can just actually have a quiet and peaceful life here. This is priceless.
I completely agree.
Different,
You know, it's much safer and much more peaceful and much calmer and just kind of more civilized. And it feels like, things, you know, I wasn't alive in the 50s or something, but it feels more like that traditional kind of life that existed, you know, decades ago in many places. So it's it's really, really nice.
We have many clients when they come to Portugal for the first time after they bought something in Portugal, and then they would ask us, is it safe for us to go outside at night? We're like, of course. And then they would text me like, oh, wow, we were out yesterday at 11 p.m. and streets were empty, but we felt so safe. We walked around for an hour, no problem. I said, yeah, it's really safe.
It really is. Yep. No, I mean, you can look at the statistics. I mean, there's, you know, it's incredibly safe. I mean, I think there are a couple parts of town where I've heard some crimes happen, but once you learn those, it's very safe. I mean, certainly compared to many parts of the U.S., unfortunately, and it's very safe.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing your experience. And I hope it's helpful for any of you who is contemplating of moving to Portugal or is in the same position as John and his wife a couple of years ago. But thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mia.
And hopefully you guys keep enjoying Portugal as much as you've been doing, which is great. And thank you guys for watching. See you the next one. Bye.